fire, a mere whisper of hope amidst the growing tension, shattered like brittle ice under the weight of ambition and hate. Across the solar system, from the sun-scorched plains of Mercury to the frigid, methane lakes of Titan, the first true salvos of full-scale war erupted. No longer were conflicts contained to border disputes or skirmishes. This was total, unyielding destruction unleashed upon every inhabited rock and orbiting station. Planetary defenses, built over centuries, crumbled under concentrated orbital bombardments. Cities that had stood for millennia were reduced to radioactive craters and smoldering rubble in mere hours. The sky over every world became a canvas of plasma fire, missile contrails, and the agonizing flares of dying warships. Ground forces, once symbols of planetary pride, were thrown into meat grinders on alien soil, fighting house to house in devastated urban centers or across barren, toxic landscapes. The clean lines of military strategy dissolved into a chaotic, brutal free-for-all, where survival often depended on sheer luck and the willingness to commit unspeakable acts. Communication networks buckled and failed, isolating worlds and forcing commanders to fight blind, relying on outdated intelligence or desperate runners. Propaganda machines on every planet screamed of righteous fury and the enemy's monstrous atrocities, fueling the hatred that drove the conflict ever deeper. Refugee fleets, overloaded with desperate civilians, clogged hyperspace lanes, only to be hunted down by opportunistic pirates or enemy combatants who saw soft targets rather than innocent lives. Mercy became a forgotten concept, a luxury no one could afford in the face of overwhelming violence. The resources that had once bound the solar system together, the asteroid mines, the gas giant harvesting stations, the orbital factories, became prime targets, fought over with savage intensity. Their destruction crippled economies and condemned billions to starvation or exposure, adding another layer to the war's unfolding horror. Generals like Varkas reveled in the carnage, seeing the solar system not as a home to be defended, but as a chessboard to be cleared with brutal efficiency. His fleets moved like predatory beasts, leaving trails of wreckage and despair in their wake. His strategies measured in body counts and conquered territory. Even in the deep dark beyond the established colonies, the war's tendrils reached. Mercenary armies, drawn by the scent of blood and profit, arrived from distant systems, their ships adding to the chaos and their loyalties solely to the highest bidder. Kino's hired guns were among the first to arrive, their reputation for brutality preceding them. The sheer scale of the conflict was overwhelming. Battles raged simultaneously in the atmospheres of gas giants, within asteroid fields, and on the surface of rocky inner worlds. Each engagement was a microcosm of the larger war, a desperate struggle for survival where alliances were fleeting and betrayal was a constant threat. This was not the war anyone had truly anticipated, not even the most cynical strategists. It was a system-wide collapse, a descent into savagery that threatened to consume everything, leaving behind only the ashes of a once proud civilization. The Troy legacy was being written not in victory parades, but in bloodstains and the screams of the dying. Kalen's campaigns on Mars began not as strategic masterstrokes, but as desperate, bloody brawls in the red dust and cramped mining tunnels. Yet with each brutal victory, a pattern emerged. Swift, overwhelming force applied with chilling precision. He didn't just fight, he annihilated, leaving little room for counterattack or organized retreat. The cost in rebel lives was steep, a grim tally added to the ledger of war, but the momentum was undeniable. The assault on the Argus Ridge processing plant, a heavily fortified Jovian outpost, was a prime example. Instead of a frontal siege, Kalen ordered a multi-pronged, simultaneous strike through treacherous, unstable terrain. Losses were horrific, as entire squads were lost to rockfalls and buried mines, but the sheer audacity and speed of the assault shattered the Jovian defenders' morale. The plant fell within hours, a strategic prize secured through sheer, brutal will. Word of these victories, carried across the system faster than any official communique, ignited sparks of hope among the oppressed populations. On Venus, where Varkas's iron fist choked the life out of the cities, secret networks whispered Kalen's name. On distant Uranus, shackled by generations of rigid control, clandestine messages spoke of a Martian who fought not for titles, but for freedom from tyranny. His success, born of blood and sacrifice, became a symbol. Recruits, desperate and hardened by the war's early brutality, began flocking to Kalen's banner. They came from shattered Mercury settlements, from the desolate mining moons of Jupiter, even from the asteroid belt's lawless fringes. They were not trained soldiers, for the most part, but laborers, engineers, former guards, and farmers, all carrying the scars of oppression and a burning desire for vengeance or simply survival under a different banner. Their numbers swelled the ranks, providing the manpower Kalen desperately needed. Each battle one chipped away at Kalen's initial idealism. The necessity of survival, the cold logic of war, demanded increasingly harsh measures. Executions of prisoners became commonplace, not out of sadism, but perceived efficiency. Civilian populations in contested zones were often treated with suspicion, sometimes brutally, to prevent intelligence leaks. The lines he had once sworn never to cross blurred, and then vanished entirely under the weight of command and consequence. For the civilians caught in the path of Kalen's advancing forces, the relief of liberation often came intertwined with new forms of hardship and fear. Supply lines were precarious, food scarce, and the occupying rebel troops, while ostensibly allies, were often weary, brutalized, and short-tempered. The promise of freedom felt distant when faced with the immediate struggle for daily survival amidst the rubble and the constant threat of Varkas's inevitable, savage counterattacks. General Varkas, observing Kalen's rising tide with growing unease, began to shift his focus. The Martian was no longer just a troublesome rebel leader. He was a genuine threat gaining dangerous traction. Reports of Kalen's ruthlessness reached Jovian command, confirming that this was an enemy who understood the brutal language of this war. Varkas started diverting significant resources, fleets, and ground forces to contain and crush this burgeoning Martian rebellion. Kalen's campaigns were strategically vital. They secured key resource nodes on Mars and several orbital platforms, providing the rebellion with much-needed ore, fuel, and manufacturing capacity. More importantly, they established forward operating bases, allowing the rebels to project power beyond Mars itself and begin planning incursions into territory previously considered untouchable, directly challenging Varkas's perceived dominance. The grim reality of Kalen's success was the escalating body count and the moral compromises required to achieve it. Every victory was stained with the blood of both enemy and ally, a stark reminder that in this war, progress was measured in lives lost and ideals sacrificed. The narrative of the Martian was becoming less about justice and more about conquest, mirroring the very powers he initially fought against. By the end of this phase, Kalen had transformed the disparate Martian factions into a formidable fighting force. They had gained significant territory and, more importantly, had become a rallying point for discontent across the solar system. But the cost was high. Etched onto Kalen's soul and the faces of his troops lay having a trail of destruction and a chilling preview of the escalating brutality that would define the war to come. Momentum had been gained, but the path forward was darker, paved with necessary evils. News of Kalen's Martian rebels, emboldened by early victories and swelling ranks, reached General Varkas on Jupiter like a shard of ice lodging in his cold, calculating heart. He had allowed Kalen his small triumphs, viewing the scattered rebel cells as mere irritants, gnats buzzing around the colossal might of his Jovian war machine. But these recent successes, particularly the disruption of key supply lines and the defection of a Saturnian pilot, signaled a growing threat, one he would extinguish with absolute, unyielding force. Gathering his council of grim-faced commanders, men forged in the crushing gravity and brutal discipline of Jupiter's military academies, Varkas outlined his response. It would not be a surgical strike, not a calculated containment. It would be a hammer blow, a systematic eradication of dissent, a stark, terrifying message sent across the solar system: defy Varkas and face annihilation. His strategy was simple, brutal, and horrifyingly effective: scorched earth. Targets were not just rebel strongholds, but the very planets and moons that dared to harbor them. Civilian populations were not collateral damage. In many cases, they were the target, their infrastructure, food sources, and homes designated for complete destruction to deny the rebels support and instill terror in the populace. The initial wave of the counteroffensive was a symphony of destruction. Massive Jovian warships, hulking fortresses of metal and plasma, descended upon worlds that had declared for Kalen or offered refuge to his fighters. Orbital bombardment turned cities into craters, vaporized resource depots, and ignited atmospheric fires that choked the sky. Ground forces, clad in heavy, oppressive armor, followed the bombardments. Their orders were simple: leave nothing that could aid the enemy. Wells were poisoned, crops burned, factories leveled. Resistance was met with overwhelming, disproportionate violence. Every act of defiance repaid 100-fold in blood and ruin. On Io, a moon previously known for its volcanic beauty and vital mining operations, Varkus's forces systematically detonated seismic charges, triggering artificial eruptions that swallowed entire settlements. The screams were broadcast across subspace channels, a chilling propaganda tool designed to break the will of other potential rebels. Europa, a moon with subsurface oceans whispered to hold life, was subjected to targeted torpedo strikes, cracking its icy crust and unleashing geysers of superheated water that scoured the surface. The fragile ecosystems and any hidden rebel bases beneath were utterly destroyed, a wanton act of environmental devastation for strategic gain. The sheer scale of Varkos's brutality sent shockwaves through the solar system. Planets that had been considering joining the rebellion hesitated, witnessing the horrific fate of those who had. Fear, a potent weapon in Varkos's arsenal, spread faster than any starship, crippling morale and fostering a sense of utter hopelessness. Varkos watched the reports of destruction with a chilling lack of emotion. Each city reduced to rubble, each population scattered or eliminated, was another step towards consolidating his iron grip. He saw not innocent lives, but variables, obstacles to be removed from his path to the vacant throne. His war was not just for territory, but for the complete subjugation of the solar system's will. This brutal counteroffensive not only halted Kalen's momentum, but redefined the conflict. The lines between soldier and civilian blurred into non-existence under Varkos's scorched earth policy. The war was no longer just a fight for freedom. It had become a desperate struggle for survival against a force willing to pay any cost in lives and destruction to achieve absolute power. Deep within the scorched canyons of Mercury, Elias hunched over a flickering ancient console, the air thick with the scent of ozone and dust. His fingers, stained with grime from countless excavated data cores, danced across controls that predated the Troy dynasty by millennia. He wasn't just finding schematics for forgotten weapons anymore. He was piecing together fragments of a horrifying narrative, a history deliberately erased from the standard galactic chronicles. The data crystals screamed silent tales of a civilization that had risen and fallen before humanity ever reached for the stars. Not a peaceful, enlightened society, but one built on brutal conquest and unthinkable exploitation. Their power hadn't come from mere technology, but from tapping into energies that twisted the very fabric of reality, leaving scars on space-time that still resonated faintly in the present. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his gut. The ancient weapon he had unearthed wasn't just a super bomb. It was a conduit, a key to unleashing the same forces that had consumed its creators. The power he had thought could bring peace, or at least a swift end to the current suffering, was inherently tied to an ancient, devastating appetite. The records detailed internal conflicts, power struggles mirroring the present war, but on a scale that dwarfed the current solar system. Factions vying for control over these forbidden energies had unleashed cataclysmic events, planetary-scale destruction that left behind only echoes and ruins, like the ones Elias now inhabited. He found references to lineages and inheritors, not of thrones, but of specific, often terrifying abilities or connections to the ancient power sources. The thought struck him like a physical blow. Was the Troy lineage, the very foundation of the empire that had just collapsed, somehow connected to these ancient bloodlines? Was the current civil war merely a predictable, cyclical resurgence of a conflict as old as the system itself? The weight of this knowledge pressed down on him, heavier than the crushing gravity of a gas giant. His pacifist ideals felt like brittle glass against the iron reality of what he was uncovering. This wasn't just history, it was a blueprint for inevitable destruction, a dark prophecy repeating itself across the ages. He saw illustrations, crude but chilling, depicting the ancient civilization's leaders not as wise rulers, but as figures cloaked in shadow, their eyes burning with unnatural light, presiding over scenes of widespread suffering and sacrifice. The Golden Age, described in sanitized histories, was a lie built upon an ocean of blood. Every new data shard revealed another layer of depravity, another forgotten atrocity. Planets now ravaged by Varkos's forces had been scoured clean by ancient weapons millennia ago. The current slavery and oppression felt like a grotesque echo of the ancient system's societal structure. Elias understood now that the conflict wasn't just about who sat on a throne, it was about controlling the remnants of this ancient power, knowingly or unknowingly. Varkas's brutal ambition, Kalen's desperate fight, Kino's shadowy plotting, they were all players in a game whose rules were set by ghosts from the deep past. His hands trembled as he backed away from the console. The ancient weapon felt colder, more menacing now. It wasn't a tool for justice or even tactical advantage. It was a key to unlocking the very forces that had brought about the first apocalypse. The decision he faced was no longer about whether to use a weapon, but whether to unleash an ancient horror upon a solar system already drowning in its own self-made misery. The silence of the Mercurian depths, usually a comfort, now felt suffocating. Elias was alone with a truth too terrible to bear. A truth that could either save the solar system from its current war by revealing a shared ancient enemy, or condemn it to a fate far worse than anything Varkas or Kalen could inflict. He gathered the critical data cores, their surfaces strangely warm against his skin, pulsing with the weight of millennia of secrets. He had to get this information out, had to share it. But who would believe him? And how could he explain that the present war was merely a symptom of a much older, much darker disease? Deep within the asteroid belt, aboard a salvaged Saturnian long-range scout ship disguised as a derelict freighter, Zara meticulously filtered the data stream. Every byte crackled with tension, transmitted across encrypted subspace channels from a network of disillusioned contacts still embedded within the rigid Saturnian hierarchy. This intelligence, pieced together from whispers and coded signals, detailed the terrifying precision of General Varkas's next planned offensive. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, sifting through fleet manifests, estimated jump points, and projected planetary bombardment trajectories. Varkas wasn't just attacking, he was planning surgical devastation, targeting civilian infrastructure and supply lines with chilling efficiency. His goal wasn't just conquest, but utter demoralization and the systematic breaking of resistance. The risk of interception was astronomical. Saturnian internal security was notoriously thorough, and Varkas's own intelligence network was vast and ruthless. A single misstep, a fractional delay in the encryption cycle, and she would be hunted across the solar system, her fate a grim certainty of torture and public execution. Despite the cold fear that often prickled at the base of her neck, Zara pushed the data through the final encryption layer. Her motives were complex. A dangerous cocktail of genuine moral revulsion at Varkas's methods, a calculated play for influence, and a desperate, buried hope for a future where Saturn wasn't merely a cog in a brutal war machine. But for now, this information had to reach Kalen. Miles away, orbiting a scarred moon of Jupiter, Kalen's command vessel, the Martian Fury, was a hive of grim activity. Maps of the solar system glowed dimly in the tactical center, marked with enemy positions and projected battle lines. The air was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen, sweat, and the metallic tang of desperation. A low-priority data burst registered on the Fury's deep scan sensors. Lieutenant Commander Valerius, the communications officer, flagged it with a raised eyebrow. Encrypted, non-standard origin, sir? Looks like a Saturnian packet, highly scrambled. Kalen hunched over a tactical display, straightened slowly. He knew who used non-standard Saturnian encryption. Patch it through, Valerius. Decrypt on the fly. Eyes only for me and Anya. As the data unfolded on his private terminal, the grim lines on Kalen's face deepened. Varkos wasn't heading for Ceres as predicted. His primary fleet was vectoring towards the Venusian orbital habitats, a move designed to cripple the rebels' industrial base and slaughter millions of civilians. It was a devastating feint, a brutal masterstroke of misdirection. Zara's intelligence was precise, detailing the number of assault carriers, their estimated arrival time, and even the specific orbital platforms marked for annihilation. Without this warning, the habitats would have been caught completely unprepared, their defenses focused elsewhere. Varkos's plan to break Venus, Anya's homeworld, would have succeeded. Armed with this critical data, Kalin issued immediate, urgent orders. Defense fleets were rerouted, evacuation protocols accelerated, and deep space mines were rapidly deployed along Varkos's projected path. It wouldn't stop the attack entirely, but it would blunt the worst of it, saving countless lives and preserving vital infrastructure. Zara's gamble for now had paid off, offering a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness and proving that even the most ruthless strategies could be undone by timely, dangerous truth.